I want to introduce myself as Bill Sirius, and I have some of my friends with me, and we're talking about how to lead a chosen study. This study started about 5 years ago or so, and I've never felt like I've really had the gift of evangelism, but I've had a passion for evangelism. It's true everywhere that people, there's good news that people just don't know about or haven't really grappled with. And I've always wanted to be part of talking about it with people, even though I don't feel like I'm particularly gifted in the area. I just have a desire to see it happen. So maybe that kind of describes you as well. Probably does. I don't see Billy Graham on the screen here, and yet I know there's a lot of passionate, deeply committed people to Jesus, and that's really what it's about, isn't it? So Teresa and I kind of got this thing rolling in our church and ended up with 20 to 25 people coming on a regular basis. And what it was kind of geared towards two different evangelistic ministries that came from the UK. One is called Alpha, and it started probably 20 years ago now in a church. And the other was called Christianity Explored. They're both actually, interestingly enough, from Britain. And they have a very similar dynamic. You meet, you eat together, you watch a video, and you talk about it. And one is a little bit more charismatic, that's Alpha, and one's a little bit more kind of traditional evangelical, that's Christianity Explored. But they're really similar, and God has really used these. I think probably Alpha's in 160 some countries at this point, and Christianity Explored has been growing quickly as well. That was kind of what the Jesus study, I looked at those things and I said, yeah, maybe we could do something like that, but focus it just around Jesus, essentially. And so the thing that started my thinking was a film. It's called The Life of Jesus. It's really the Gospel of John in the Good News translation, word for word. And I've seen a lot of Jesus films at this point. Maybe I've seen, most of them probably. And they're not that great, most of them. But the Jesus film that is called The Life of Jesus about John is actually pretty good. And that was an example of kind of combining film with scripture. So we would meet together and we'd watch clips of the film. We had it written out in our guides, the Good News version, word for word. And so after we'd do 3 clips an evening. We'd watch a clip. We would study it briefly with a Bic pen. Bic pen was kind of, for those of you who know about manuscript Bible study, which is most of you, this is kind of manuscript light. There we go. Robert's got a Bic pen. There you go. And, manuscript heavy was when we used to have manuscripts typed out and double spaced and no chapter verse notation. So the idea was, why couldn't we do something but make it kind of light and fun and not quite as intense as a manuscript study of Mark or Galatians, whatever, but kind of combine scripture, manuscript study light, discussion, personal study for a while, discussion in smaller groups, and then because we had a larger group, we also could do dialogical discussion and teaching in a larger group setting. So it was a kind of a cool setup where people would come in and we had a small team. We called it the Jesus study team. We'd reach out to our friends and neighbors and coworkers. We'd invite them in, and we would organize the whole thing and the food and everything else. And then we'd have an evening of watching this Jesus film and studying scripture together and talking about it. So it was kind of like Christianity Explored and Alpha, but it was really focused on Jesus. Now, we also did Ecclesiastes. We called it the Life Study. And then we watched music videos, kind of contemporary music videos when we did that. We had the Paul study, and we focused on passages in the letters and in Acts that would be pretty user-friendly for folks on the outside, like the chapter on love, for instance. We did Philemon and a few other things. So 10 weeks of Paul in one way or the other. And we did a few others like that. Well, COVID shut us down a couple of years ago, was it now? Or is it just a year and a half? It seems like forever. I don't know when it was. And the interesting thing, though, that happened while COVID was raging, at least for me, was that The Chosen came out. And the first time I saw The Chosen, I said, oh my gosh, this is the best Jesus study we could organize a group around that's ever been created. Obviously, I mean, there's going to be 7 seasons of The Chosen. How many of you have watched The Chosen, or at least part of it? Is that true?
One episode last night.
One episode, okay. Which one did you see, Dietrich?
Well, I started with episode 1, but I think before that it was there was a pilot episode.
Right.
So episode 1, season 1 was Nicodemus and Mary Magdalene, and I call you by name.
Yeah. What'd you think? Just to get your
to jump in a little bit without any backstory to it, it was interesting just to focus there and see her with her demons, and knowing that Jesus was going to be the one who could heal her. Knowing Nicodemus had tried, that's a good backstory, and he failed to exorcise her.
Yeah.
So,
do you know that Mary Magdalene
has a very minor role in that particular episode? He doesn't show up until the very end.
Yeah, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Do you know that Mary Magdalene is mentioned 12 times in the New Testament? I mean, I had no idea that she is actually, she is front and center in everything. We just don't, obviously the discipleship group is male oriented, and we don't really know exactly to what extent she was traveling with Jesus, but we do know there was a group of women who were following along and supporting the ministry, and it's very well kind of like it was depicted. It's hard to know for sure, but I thought, for a person who is a non-church person, who's out there in the world, who knows something maybe or something not, they might be a skeptic, or they might be a seeker, or they might be just tangentially related and a little indifferent. Boy, this kind of experience of watching an episode and then studying the very passage or passages around that episode and then talking together about it would just be a great introduction to them about who Jesus is and what his message is about. So that's kind of how things started. So here's the website. You see it in front of you there. Probably the key word as you look down this website is audacious. There's a common phrase is, this is the greatest story ever told. I think this is the most audacious story ever told. This is the most interesting, crazy, unusual, intriguing, remarkable story in human history. It's just not the greatest story. It's flat out audacious. What's the Jesus study? That's the question here. And I think this may be the best way to describe it. It's a skeptic and seeker-friendly place to talk about Jesus. That's it in a nutshell. And there's 2 Jesus study series at this point. One is the Chosen series, which is 7 seasons, and it's going to be about 56 episodes. I mean, it's going to be a lot of episodes. And then the second series that put together is called the Bible series. It's basically like I described about John leading a study in the Gospel of John, for instance, that would be similar to these studies in The Chosen, but just on another kind of Jesus film type of thing. On the left-hand side, as I scroll down here, it's just like any group study. We meet once a week for 9 or 10 weeks. We end with a review. You do not need to bring Bibles because the passage is going to be in the guide. We start with a meal, a potluck, or finger food. We share at our own comfort level, so no one is asked to sing, pray, or read aloud, which is hopefully welcome, Matt. We're wanting to give to people who are coming into the group. And then there's a facilitator in each group kind of facilitating the discussion, which I don't know if you've had a chance to look at, but it's some creativity that we've tried to put into the guide. Here's the idea is that you watch the episodes, there's some quotes about the film, and then you do your manuscript light, number 3. And then there's some notes in the guide on the passages. This kind of background information, historical background. And then 5 is kind of relate how it applies to our lives. 6 is kind of interesting there. We all understand that there's a lot of artistic creativity in the Chosen script. And this is just something to kind of take the Chosen to task a little bit and saying, well, was this true? Did it happen? Or is this kind of conjecture, or is this outright the timetable is totally turned around? For instance, did Nicodemus ever come to Capernaum? Do we? Well, we don't know that, do we? Jesus met him in Jerusalem, not Capernaum. So it's kind of interesting. It's we all kind of acknowledge that their backstory is possibly plausible, but not necessarily real. So, any questions or thoughts so far about what I've talked about?
So what is the relationship between you and Dallas Jenkins in terms of, he knows you're writing content, study guide stuff to go with it? Did he commission you to do it? Is he got others that are doing something similar? You just happen to be also doing it?
I'm just doing it. So I have interacted with Dallas a few times via email. The guy has got to be freaking busy, but he does take emails and he responds. And he basically said, I like what you're doing. Just keep any images of the Chosen, off of it, and we'll be good. So okay. That's kind of, okay, Dallas. I actually asked him to co-author it, because I thought, boy, wouldn't that be nice to have his name plastered all over this thing? And he declined. They have put a kind of a Bible study guide together. It's definitely not. It's really oriented towards Christians, I feel like, rather than non-church folks. So it wasn't of interest to me, although I've read it through. But anyway, he likes what we're doing, but it's not. Doesn't have the Chosen's authorization to it, let's say.
And you haven't actually led a study yet of the Chosen.
No, Teresa and I are going to start on June 15th. When is that? That's a couple weeks from now?
Yeah.
Yeah, my hope for this Zoom meeting is that eventually we get Chosen study leaders on it, learning how to more effectively use it, and also being supported in prayer and just creative ideas, what other people are doing, so they feel like they're not alone out there, but they've got a community of folks who are using this. Doing the Jesus study, I feel like I've learned so much about how impotent I am of getting anybody anywhere spiritually. I mean, it is all the Holy Spirit's work, just flat out. When you invite people, when they make that decision if they're going to come or not, when they're in the group and they're bringing all their New Age ideas, and is that going to be able to are they going to be able to see something different? All those things. I mean, there is nothing we can do other than pray that God would work to see people cross over the line. It is all His work, and that's just the bottom line. Now, can we make it as good as possible? Yeah, and that's why I think the Chosen, which when you think about it, here's some people who've decided to put together budgets of millions of dollars to do production, put millions of people, now 175 million views on the Chosen already. Now that doesn't mean 175 people have seen it or some part of it, but 175 million views. They're going up every single day. The buzz is getting out. I mean, all our promotion is being done for us here. There's nothing we hardly need to do. I mean, we can share the trailer, we can put out some flyers, but we don't have to take people from 0, to 10. It's already done for us. We just need to kind of say, okay, we're just going to do this thing that you already know something about, or maybe a lot about, or maybe really, really enthusiastic about. So that's got me excited about it. Tori's actually doing it with her sister right now online, right, Tori? How's that going?
It's going great. We'll be doing another episode this Sunday.
Cool.
Yeah, it's been really great. She's She's not skeptic. She's I don't know where she would fit in, but I know this is really good for her, for someone who's kind of coming back to the Lord.
On the first page here, you'll notice this is on the very first page, and this is mentioned more than once. A welcoming and interactive experience for everyone: observers, skeptics, learners, seekers, followers. If you fit into that category, you're invited to come. That's who we want. Anybody in that category right there, those categories. So great. And you can do it, of course, in small groups, or you can do it in a small and large group gathering, which is what Teresa and I have mostly done. And those have been pretty fun because they are dialogical experiences. When the small groups, having talked with each other, now can talk in a larger group context, and that gets to be pretty interactive and fun to do. This is an example of a group gathering. Anyway, the time. We always do some kind of meal. Now, you could do just finger food if you want to take it easy, but this is a great time of group bonding and getting to know each other before the actual study starts. So I learned that from Alpha and Christianity Explored. They're really into food, and I think for good reason. The basics of leading a group. Again, think about the target here is the guide is not only for members in the group, but the guide is actually trying to teach leaders how to do this thing as well. So in basic terms, you gather a small team, you choose a film or a study, you invite your friends, you plan for food, you facilitate the group, and you multiply your efforts. And then this is helpful because some groups obviously have longer times to meet and other groups have shorter times. Like Tori's doing something with her sister where they watch The Chosen independently and then they come together to talk about it. Yeah. You probably go an hour or so, Tori, do you think?
Yeah, I'd say about like 45 minutes.
Okay. If you have a longer period of time, like the one that Teresa and I have led, which I think can be the most impactful, but it takes a much longer period of time, that's when you watch it together. So you're assuming people have watched it themselves for its entertainment value. You come together and you watch it with the questions in mind that are in the guide here. If you have somewhere in the middle of that time, then you're going to just have to kind of figure it out and pace yourself to use the guide in the most effective way. Okay, and while we're doing that, we're trying to slip in some manuscript light, and page 8 and 9 talk about how to do that. And then when you have this prior to the study, this is kind of important stuff for the leader to take note of. Beginning with, it says begin with gathering and exchanging names. Of course, we take that for granted, all of us on this Zoom call, but people who are facilitating a study for this first time, they're not, there's nothing taken for granted here, Talk through with the group the study process that we just went through on pages 3 to 9. Read aloud the passages. We do want that to happen, but be conscious of not having people read who are new to the group or uncomfortable or who you haven't cleared first. Are you comfortable reading out loud type of thing? Spend some time in personal study with a big pen, and that might be 5 minutes. It might be 10 minutes. You're going to have to gauge that. And then discuss the passages. In this case, it's the Old Testament passages because we're going to start before we even watch the episode in this pilot episode. We're going to start with looking at the 3 Old Testament passages that are recited in the synagogue for this episode. So, and by the way, this is kind of important here too. Most Bible studies use very specific questions, like what did Jesus say about being born again in verses 16 to 23 kind of thing. That's not the kind of study I envision here because, remember, we've already done some personal study ourselves. So like a true manuscript study, I would encourage people to start with general questions. What did you see here? What surprised you? Describe what you observed in this section. These questions might be all you need to get the conversation rolling, and you're guiding it as a facilitator, right? So you don't want it to go off the rails, but you don't need to ask a bunch of specific questions if people have have learned to observe themselves and take their little study time seriously. And you're kind of reiterating that they're the one teaching each other. You don't come with a bunch of questions for them just to write answers out on. You're kind of, this is a live wire discussion. Now, when the discussion kind of wanes or when people start to get off the track, then you can start using these specific questions that come in the guide if you find them helpful.
Our church, it has 800 if everybody came to church on a given Sunday. And we've been growing well over the last 10 years from 330 up to 800. We don't have an evangelism program. We used to have Alpha. The pastor himself is quite good at projecting the gospel, teaching the gospel. We have a lot of crew and InterVarsity people in our church because we are the headquarters town for InterVarsity. But I'm thinking, since we used to do Alpha, it fell by the wayside without somebody to lead it. And I could step in. I've never done Alpha, but I could do this with training from you all and get the books ordered. Is that what you hope to do, is sort of, hey, you liked Alpha, you're going to love the Jesus study? Or I'm jumping the gun into your marketing plan and how you're going to pitch this, because churches are going to be familiar with something, and then you're going to try to sell them on this instead.
No, it's not either or, it's and. Okay. Do everything that you think could be effective. I just think talking about Jesus as the central theme of the whole deal is what I want to do. But Teresa, what's your you have some thoughts about that?
The thing that was hardest for me to wrap my head around was the meal beforehand, and I guess if you've done Alpha, you usually do that. But
yes, we always had the meal.
Mm-hmm. And we didn't have a team that just did the meal. We went to an Alpha study, and they had people that behind the scenes that just did the meal. But we kind of had the people involved in the Jesus study start the meal, and then we passed around. It's more of a potluck sheet. But I'll tell you, that meal was really important to the people that weren't believers in the group. They don't get to do that very often with people. Church people have potlucks. Other people don't. And they were super impressed with getting to eat with everybody and sit around and talk. And so that sold me on, it's a hassle, but it sold me on trying to spend that time to get a meal ready for everybody. That was hard. I really liked the small group, large group dynamic. We did table groups because we ate together in table groups, and then broke up. And we didn't break up, but then we led the whole thing in a discussion. That was really, really good too. And breaking it up all night long with video, Bible study, discussion, large group, kept the pace really good. And so if you're going back and forth between things like that. I do feel like prayer is important, but that is something that we kind of organized around the team that was leading it. So we would do that at a different time. And then encouraging people to kind of target people to be friends with. That kind of happened too in the group. And to this day, one of the people that was in one of our second studies maybe is still really good friends with the woman that was in the group, and she's still not a believer. So, but they're really, really good friends.
What if, or did you try this? I'm just thinking out loud. Last night I watched episode 1 of The Chosen just on my own computer. Just took it for an hour and a half that I had before supper last night, right after getting Bill's email, because I only heard about this yesterday. So is this something I could email a friend and said, hey, check one of these episodes out. If you like one, you'll like all 8. And then you'll have a group to share it with, and we can answer some of your questions that may have stimulated. But you need to check it out first. It's sort of like doing online shopping before you buy. You just sample it. Do you ever market it that way?
We could. I totally think you could. I mean, this one is easily available to people. The other ones that we did weren't. So this would be really great.
Dietrich, do you see on the screen here under the Chosen series?
Yes.
You can click season 1.
Yes.
And right down here, that's the PDF of it. But right here is the trailer of Chosen 1.
Oh, I didn't even notice the trailer before this. That would be an easy one to send out.
Yeah, why not send them the trailer?
Yes.
Bill, what I'm thinking about, these are not super long passages, and people can get out, some people just get this word out of it right there, or that, right? That the ruler was to come and be born in Bethlehem. That's pretty much what Micah 5 says. And as Isaiah 9 says that it's going to be a child, for to us a child is born. That's going to be. And then the ransom will return. This relates to something that's going to happen a little bit later, but it's the whole proclamation of Jesus in the synagogue, of course, in Luke 4, I think it is. And that's what that is about there. So they're not real. People can just take it. Hey, I see the word Bethlehem in here. No, that kind of reminds me of where Jesus was born, so you can take it at that level. Now, the shepherd is only 23 minutes long. And that's why I think it's a real good one to start if your group is watching it together, because it's just shorter. Gives you more time to do this stuff right here, and that is kind of begin the group, get people's names, talk about what you're going to do, all that preliminary stuff that you want to do, and then you're seeing you're studying through this, and then you watch it together right here. Here's the pilot episode that you're watching with a few questions, and they're not real deep questions. They're just how would you describe the shepherd's encounter with the one main shepherd with the religious leaders, Joseph and Mary, the angelic host, and the baby Jesus? And that's just for people to think about, and they can write notes as they want to. They can write it while it's happening. They can write it afterwards. It's however you want to lead it. And then it goes into the story. After watching the episode, it goes into the birth story itself. And the episode is taken right out of Luke 2. So you get to see it. And then there's some subsequent questions, and just a couple questions here from Luke 2, and then this kind of relate how it applies. Again, this isn't quite an application like it would be in a Bible study group. We're not kind of talking about where you're at spiritually as much as, let's say you had never heard the story of Jesus' birth. What would surprise you about it or make you uncomfortable? The word audacious means so forth and so on. In what way was Jesus' birth audacious?
Yeah.
And does Jesus' birth story make him more appealing to you? If so, how? And then again, here's some brief notes from each of the passages that are used, kind of thing. Just for anybody in the group can read these notes. It gives them a little historical context and background for that passage while they're doing their personal study. And again, you're watching the episode. No, excuse me. You're following along with this guide. So sometimes you watch the episode first, but most of the time you actually start and you study a passage, then you watch the episode, then you go to another passage, a subsequent passage. So anytime during the personal study group for episode 2, unlike episode 1, you started with a passage. Episode 2, you start by watching the episode itself. So it's different. Every week is a little different. And it just seemed to hit me that this would be better to do it this way.
You just said episode 2, but you're referring to episode 1.
I'm sorry, episode 1.
Second one in the sequence, because
exactly.
The pilot study is episode 0.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Tori, you had something you were going to jump in.
Yeah, if I could, I don't know if this will help the other Bill in his previous question, but kind of going back to your question of coming together and watching the episode as well as doing the guide, I'll say with my sister isn't all that knowledgeable about the Bible. And so it really helps watching an episode of The Chosen, which does exercise their creative license pretty well. It's not all that accurate. It's accurate, but not accurate to the Bible. And so it was really helpful watching The Chosen and then going directly to scripture of what The Chosen was about. And I think that even helped her not take The Chosen as Bible and as biblical truth, but instead relating it to biblical truth. That was incredibly helpful for her, because I know in discussing The Chosen, she would make some remarks of, "Oh, I didn't know this happened," and then
know Jesus' wife was named Eden.
Yeah.
I mean, Peter's wife is.
Sorry, yeah.
Wow,
Yeah, sorry.
What am I in The Last Temptation of Christ? That was not that good a movie.
Yeah, and also what really helped too, this section that we're on, realistic but real. I think that helps too, in answering some of the questions of, well, was that real? Was that truth? Well, we have this section to refer to.
Yeah, this is right. Really no passage for the first episode. There is this section of scripture that Mary's father has her recite, and she memorizes and becomes very important to her life. And Jesus obviously reclaims her, redeems her, and speaks these words. I mean, very touching, obviously. Well done. But there's no real passage. So what I've done here is I've taken Luke 7:36-50, which is the sinful woman who's breaks into Simon the Pharisee's house when he's having Jesus over for dinner, and she weeps at his feet and wipes his feet with her hair, tears, and anoints them. And of course, that sets up this great contrast between this woman who's a sinner and Simon, who's a righteous guy, right? And the little parable that Jesus tells about who recognizes their debt and who doesn't. So Mary, it's actually possible that this story is about Mary. It's possible. I think it's a little unlikely, but it certainly describes a person like Mary who's had this kind of encounter with Jesus and who's been redeemed and forgiven and restored by him. And this is the kind of woman that is described in Luke 7, I think. This is probably the best. When I talk to a person and describe exactly what the gospel, remember, there's a debt owed by both. There's forgiveness offered to both, and there's a response made from both. What better encapsulates the gospel story than Luke 7:36-50? So I use that, and I think
seeker person comes in actually ever goes to this website. This is just for the leaders.
That's exactly right. This is to support the person that are trying to put the group together and lead it, kind of thing.
Right.
And I ultimately, I think the most challenging thing to do, and this isn't a surprise, is inviting people there.
Sure.
We have our group that we pulled together, the Jesus Study team, and Teresa and I had a number of times we just met with that team and prayed, talked, shared, and we also had barbecues with just that team. And by the way we ran it is during the summer, we just met with that team, and we'd have some picnics and stuff. And we actually invited everybody, but we didn't necessarily expect them to come. And it was informal, but we focused in on the team that was coming. And then we during the winter, we didn't meet either. We also kind of treated it like the summer because it was kind of intense. So we did it in the spring and the fall is when we actually led the group. And that way, because doing the food and all that stuff and having the room and inviting people, it just became pretty intense. So having one on, one off all throughout the year made it just tolerable, the intensity of it.
And you did these all at your church?
We met, the first one we met in a hotel. It was in a lobby, but it was where they ate breakfast.
Continental breakfast room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I wanted to meet in non-religious places, if we could. Obviously, it's easier to do it in a church. And by the way, you can meet anywhere. The second series we met in, we have this alternative to abortion kind of clinic. It's called Dove Medical. And they opened up their conference room, which is really nice. It fits about 25 people. They had a big screen TV there.
A kitchenette,
which was important. And so that was a wonderful place to meet. The one that we're doing now, we're basically starting, the first one is going to be at our house. If it grows really big fast, we're going to probably move over to the Dove Medical again, that conference room. If it doesn't, we'll just do it in our house. And we prop the TV up kind of thing, and we'll just see how it goes. Season 2, Season 3, season 4, they're all going to be about different things. I think a person could jump in, let's say a leader's, and this is another thing. I feel, to be honest with you, Alpha got a little boring. Christianity Explored got a little boring because you did the same thing every time. This is not going to be the same thing. You've got so much to do, so many options here.
Yeah.
And I like that because leaders are not going to get bored. They say, I'm going to go on to season
I like that too.
I'm going to do season 3. I'm going to do the John study,
Yeah. And ostensibly you could jump in at any of the seasons. Absolutely. Except that the curriculum hasn't been developed yet for 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.
They really, really like the Chosen series here in the church that we're working in. So the task is going to be to encourage them to bring in some non-Christian friends. Iceland is a very post-Christian country, and that's going to be the challenge. Very apathetic. So we'll see how it works here. The Christians are excited about doing it, but whether we can draw in others, that's going to be the test.
That is a really challenging thing right there. And that's where it puts you to your knees, I'll tell you. And by the way, I feel like many of my encounters with just inviting people was a spiritual experience for me and for them. And unfortunately for them, it was often, I think, a step backwards spiritually because they, from a flimsy excuse, and of course everybody's busy, but from some, they would not do it. And it's like, gosh, I stepped back and I thought that is a bigger decision than you realize at this moment. And for me, it was like, I gotta pray. There's nothing I can do to get this person there.
Well, again, like I mentioned, we live in a planned neighborhood, and I'm just thinking of the sort of the cul-de-sac that we're in, trying to figure out how we could use it, just of our neighbors, and trying to just figure out if our living room, how that could work. But also thinking about it at our church. I mean, the church I go to, the head of Alpha USA was the founder of the church planters. So
oh, wow.
It's a church that knows Alpha very well, and I know Alpha very well. But as people have said, Alpha is a lot of work. But I think that we're attracting some people who might actually need the grounding that this, because I do actually think that the Chosen could be a good grounding for people who know bits and parts of the story, but don't really have the full understanding of the story. So trying to figure out, even as a discipleship class, for people who know something but don't know a lot. So just trying to think that those are the two things I'm thinking about at the moment of how would it work, what would it look like.
By the way, there's this flyer right here that you got as an attachment, and you're welcome to change this to, I think it's kind of helpful to give people, even in a cul-de-sac, say, well, this is when we're doing this kind of thing. You can change it to however it's helpful for you if you'd like to.
Now, I would be curious what the impact of this move for you as it is for somebody else going through it.
That's very true. That's very true.
Because it can get boring if you're going through Alpha or whatever it is for the 8th season in a row. Even me doing Stephen ministry 8 seasons in a row. If it was different every year, that would have been more interesting. What made it interesting is that I had new people every time. It was new for them. They're
that have never even known about The Chosen until that moment. They're going to go back and binge watch, prior seasons.
Oh, yes. They want to see what everybody else saw and is still talking about.
Right.
Oh, you've seen season 1, the episode around, the 7 demons for Mary Magdalene, and they're gonna go watch it themselves. You're right.
Yeah. I want to introduce myself as Bill Sirius, and I have some of my friends with me, and we're talking about how to lead a Chosen study. Let's say you just were in a study. I want you to see in that guide that, yes, here's some tips and tricks to leading a study, and I think I could do that myself. If you have seen something different in Jesus, get used to different. If that's where you're at, you've seen something different in Jesus, then you're ready to facilitate a conversation about him with other people. And that's all this is doing that around The Chosen or other Jesus films that we'll talk about that also lend themselves to really good conversation with people. That's the original team on the left there. It actually was slightly larger than that, but that group started in Eugene, Oregon, about 5 years ago, and it was such a support group. There's a lot of people who did a lot of work. All the meals were planned from that team. The location that we had, people setting up tables. You see on the right-hand side is the original group that met there. It was about 25. And this team was the nucleus of that group. So a Jesus study team, if you can pull one together, albeit small at first, maybe just one other person, will be a great support to you in, helping to grow your group, essentially. So start there.
One of the people helping us with the studies,
Oops.
he worked at a hospital. He was a nurse, and he made it a point to try to invite, over the time of it, every coworker he had there. And that was extremely challenging, but rewarding experience for him. No one, I think, came in the end, but he got to talk about his faith with everyone he worked with, which was, for him, a really good experience and challenging and growing experience. So those kind of things people don't usually do, but if they have a reason to do it, like I want to invite you to something, it'll bring up spiritual issues. And I had several friends that I've had spiritual conversations with over the years that I invited, and they never did come. So it's hard to get people to cross the barrier of coming to a group. And I think if they would have come once, they would have liked it. But it was nerve-wracking. So those things it's hard. The hardest thing is to get people to come.
Some of our experiences with Alpha, which has a similar type of format, I would say that as soon as you're even thinking that you want to offer this, you just start praying and asking God, who in my sphere of influence might you be leading me to? So I think it just starts with just becoming alert prayer-wise, even while you're doing all the logistics of thinking about when to do it and how to do it. I mean, you're starting to ask God to lead you to people, and even to lead for discussions, that discussions would open.
Don brought this question up. Manuscript, we call it manuscript light study, or you can just call it mark it up study. I tend to like just mark it up. The study format is really just twofold: discover and relate. The discover process is this mark it up or manuscript light type of study where you ask the W questions. Who's involved? When did it happen? Where is it happening? What is happening? How is it happening? And why is it happening? And we use a 4-colored Bic pen because it's kind of fun to just, circle in red and box in green and make clouds and, these kind of things that you see right here, this pen. There is no color-coded method to do this, okay? The manuscript light or mark it up style of study, there's nothing magical to it. It's just simply engaging another part of your senses. We're seeing it with our eyes, we're thinking about it, but this gets our tactile, our hands involved, and we're able to just engage it with one more sense. That helps the study process. That helps the learning process. This is an example that is in the booklet as well, in the guide, of doing it in Luke 7. Now, I have to tell you, this is like, this is kind of done perfectly. I did this. This took me 3 or 4 times to do it and make it look like this. Okay. My real version is all scratched and scrambled, and it doesn't look anything like this. And I probably ought to put my first version up here rather than my last version. Okay. Because don't be intimidated by how nice this looks. Yours shouldn't look like this. Okay. But that's manuscript study, but it all leads to this, to relate. So again, remember, it's discover and relate. That's right over here on the right too. So you can express your thoughts in writing. There's places to do that in the guide. And then the discussion helps you to talk about how does this apply to God, to life, to people, and to you.
I think we talked about this last time a little bit, but people were very varied on their comfortability with writing. So there was people that just didn't, and then people that, took to it and scribbled and wrote. But everybody tended to have a discussion, even if they just looked at it. So I think time and comfortability will change that with some people, but just circling who's there, that might be what they do.
Yeah.
And then,
How much time do you give them?
That is another really good question. Part of the challenge of doing this in general is pacing. And Teresa and I have never even done the Chosen study before, but we found that in our other Jesus studies we did. And I would say that you kind of, you have to have one eye on the clock, and you have to have one eye on people's attention span. And the two kind of relate to each other because you realize you want to get through basically the bulk of the study in that given evening, and you don't want to go over and run late. That's no good. And yet also people's attention span is only so much on any given passage, so I kind of watched that a little bit. But I'd say some of the passages, just 5 minutes. Probably the longest would be maybe 15 minutes, but probably less time than you think. Then you normally think, well, this could go a while. But it's those two factors, the pace and people's attention span, and if they're really engaged or not. If they're really engaged, I might let it go longer. If they're not, then I'm going to pull it back to a discussion so everybody gets back into it. Now, before we leave this, how to lead your group. There's more information as you scroll down here, but it's how to lead a discussion. 8 don'ts of leading group discussions. Don't answer your own questions. Don't overtalk. Don't be afraid of silence. Don't be content with just one answer. Don't expect group members to respond to you with each answer. Don't reject an answer as wrong. Don't be afraid of controversy. Don't allow the group to end late. Those are really good things to keep in mind and to go back to this. And again, it's also in your guide, but it's good reminders of leading good discussion. Here's the do's, the 8 do's. Pace the study. Give members the chance to study on their own if they want. Have the scripture passage read aloud. Conduct a discussion with questions supplied. Again, start with general questions like, what do you see here? What surprised you about this? Before you go to specific questions that the guide gives you. That's talked about more in the guide too. Involve everybody more or less equally. Be on the alert for too talkative people. Too talkative people can just kill group life. All right. So if somebody's over talking because they have lots to share, you might want to take them aside after the group and say, let me tell you what I'm trying to do. 90% of what we say, people forget, but 90% of what we can get other people to say, they remember. So our job, and you're very involved, obviously, have a lot at stake and a lot of ownership in this group. Our job is to get people talking. So come on, help me do that. And again, a talkative person you want to sit right down next to because you don't have so much eye contact with, and your less talkative person you want to sit across the group from so you have more eye contact with. Keep the discussion on track by avoiding tangents and have fun with it. Any thoughts at this point?
Well, I just to remind you that when they're talking about the do's and the don'ts, we get back to the total purpose of hosting something like The Chosen, which is to expose people to the gospel step by step into the life of Jesus. And the role of the leader is not to protect orthodoxy. And I think sometimes the leader wants to, if there's a quote unquote wrong answer, to make sure that it's corrected. And I think that's the hardest thing for people who don't understand sort of the long view of what this is about and want to try to correct any wrong view rather than accept it invite others to respond, but in some ways to leave crazy ideas on the table and say, well, come back next week. We'll keep talking about this. But it's all about how do you make the person who really is questioning or really comes with some crazy ideas feel comfortable, feel welcome, feel accepted in the group, and not that you're agreeing with everything they say, but you're welcoming their participation and inviting them to hang in there as the weeks go by.
We need to keep our purpose in mind, that this is not a new believer discipleship group where we are trying to teach doctrine and truth. We're trying to introduce people to hang around Jesus and be transformed by that and get interested in him, fall in love with him. It's a different purpose than we're going to teach you doctrine and the truth.
Yeah, it's not a catechism class. That's true. It's not a catechism class. So this is our third Zoom call. We're going to focus a little bit more on promoting our groups and getting people's attention, and then what it takes to initially start leading the group. So, and let's talk a little bit about promoting our group. Teresa and I got the opportunity just to start a chosen group actually this last week. How many days ago was it, Teresa? It was like 3 days ago was our first one. So we're kind of fresh, having promoted it within our network of friends and acquaintances and coworkers and so forth. But I'd like to start with a group here of things that you've found successful in getting the word out that you've got a small group and you'd really like people to come and join you. Anybody want to start in on that?
I think clarity about, and again, the personalization, that why I've invited you. You're not just kind of a number, but I've invited you, and I'm the whole issue of welcome. I'm looking forward to you joining, and then clear instructions of what's going to happen, and clear instructions on address and parking and all that kind of stuff. I found out the more that people have clarity about the invitation and why they were invited particularly, increases the likelihood that they will actually show up.
Again, your warm hospitality, I've had them at my home, and you buy the books ahead of time, you distribute those at your first meeting, you get a directory, a membership list of everybody, and so they can connect with each other during the week, and you facilitate icebreakers in your opening meeting so people bond with each other. Then they'll want to come back. It has to be more than just the content, and it has to be more than just you. It has to be the group.
I think enthusiasm for what you're doing will sell it as well. If they understand that this is something that you're excited about, or if they think it's something you're trying to sell them on, there's a big difference.
That's a really good point, Don. We're not, well, maybe we are sometimes trying to sell a product, but we're really inviting people into a relationship, aren't we? If that comes across in a genuine way, that makes a whole lot of difference. And I also think personal invite is the way to go, even in our day and age of emails and text messaging. The more you can personalize it, and I realized, I mean, I had a list of, well, here is my list right here, of 40 people to contact, and there was no way I could personally contact these people, even call them. And I didn't know if they really wanted to call initially. I followed up my emails. I emailed them all with calls in some cases. I did contact my neighbors directly because last time I was talking to the group, by the way, I mentioned I have 4 neighbors, of which I was in prayer for, mostly because of my own lack of courage in inviting them just across the street in some cases to our house. But I got to 2 out of 4 of them. Let me just show you the group that Teresa and I hosted. I took these photos in order just to kind of memorialize it a little bit, and also to send out to them. The one on the left is our larger group, which we were just kind of jammed into our living room. We put the TV on our island, and it was more people than our house could really handle. We had 23, but and that's the good news, is that we found a new location for next week that'll not only allow us to have that many, but allow us to grow. And we hope to do so. And those are our 3 small groups we had. We broke up into. I'd meant to break into 4, but it kind of people just kind of navigated the 3 groups, so it ended up just being those 3. We had, I think, folks from all spiritual stripes. There were certainly a lot of Jesus followers there, but there were also people that I don't think Teresa and I know where they're at spiritually, and it's hard to know. Recently, we talked about having a small team within our larger group. We call it the Jesus Study Team, and those folks are kind of connected in a more intimate way. We meet together, pray together, divide up tasks. One of our gals named Ann is going to take over the organization of the food. Thank you, Ann, because that is a big task. And we'll have others who will kind of jump in to help with setting up chairs and tearing down stuff and greeting people at the door, kind of not being too mechanical, but just kind of covering the bases and helping out. Let's talk about what we do at the first gathering of any group. This is me just kind of going on and on here of explaining. I'm just going through the Jesus Study Guide, the season 1 of The Chosen, and I'm going through the first, I think it is 10 pages, and that's kind of how I start out to kind of lay the groundwork of what to expect in the study that's coming up. But let's open this up. What have some other people done for your kind of to start out? What do you think is important to get the ball rolling?
Okay, yeah, back in college when I was helping lead in a group, one thing that was really good was similar to what you did, Bill, here, is just saying what the mission of the group was, why this group was gathering, kind of what to expect, and knowing what this group was about and knowing kind of its mission statement, I think helped people know what this group was about and what to expect in the future, and how to grow in it.
A couple of things that I kind of laid out, I know, was, we are an outreach group. We are a skeptic and seeker-friendly kind of group, and I tried to make that pretty clear right from the onset, that our expectation was that there's, quote-unquote, no wrong answer. There may be better answers. That the most important thing is that people feel welcome and that their viewpoint is taken seriously and respected, even though there might be some significant differences of opinion, which is fine. We actually want that, and that we're not going to really tolerate people bad-mouthing denominations or other religions or whatever. We just want to focus on Jesus, who he is, what his message was, and the people around him, how they reacted to him. Other thoughts?
I think it's important to establish that you are the leader of the group, and that at times you're going to be asking people for their permission to interrupt so you can move on. Especially, I think in a group like this, if you don't end on time, you find it hard for people to come back the next time. So to gently ask, I always ask permission at the beginning of groups like this, that they'll let me interrupt them so that we end on time and end well. And I find that then helps when someone's really going off on a tangent or, needs to be roped in. You've already established that you're doing that for a purpose to keep the group on target. And I find that's really helpful to do at the beginning of a group.
That's a great point. Pacing is a real challenging thing, particularly with content that we're not that aware of or not that familiar with, don't have down pat. And I myself, I don't have this content down pat. We're going from a study in the passage to the episode itself, back to a subsequent passage of Scripture. We're going from personal study with our Bic pen, our mighty Bic pen, and then we're doing small group interaction and then large group interaction. So it's kind of a mess, and the pacing thing is challenging. And some of these longer episodes in The Chosen, I know pacing is going to be a challenge. They go almost an hour. And I've chosen not to break them up at this point, and to watch them entirely, particularly if you're in a group that's meeting for a couple hours at least. Then you ask people, go ahead and watch it at home for its entertainment value, but let's watch it again as a group so it's fresh. And we got those questions in our guide to kind of push us along. Tori or Teresa, did you have any thought about how the group pace went for us last Tuesday?
One thing that we did or you did in particular that was helpful is that you would run back and forth between the different groups in different rooms saying, you have 5 more minutes. Because we were studying the passage and Bill would come in and warn the whole group, okay, we got 5 more minutes and then we're getting back together, which helped me as facilitating it to move on or to say, well, we're not going to finish, but we'll talk in the big group or something like that. But it gave an expectation to the whole group of how long we could discuss things.
Yeah, I agree, kind of tagging along that. One thing that helped in facilitating my group is, one, having Bill state when we're going to be going back together in a group, but also part of what we did was we had a time of studying the scripture that was in the guide, and then a time of discussing what we studied. And that was another really good thing that I appreciated Bill doing, is after a certain while, Bill would say, okay, great, now it's time to discuss. And I think that helped everyone pace at the same speed instead of rushing everything at the very end.
When you have these larger groups like we did, and we had a group in another room, but fortunately next week we're going to be having all the groups in the same room, so you can kind of keep people together more easily, which is nice. So, of course, the chosen study can be done one-on-one or can be done in a small group, but this kind of dynamic where you have let's say over a dozen people, maybe even over 10, when you can divide it into more than one group is pretty nice, because you get the in-depth values that come from the dynamics of a small group, and then you have the breadth experience of having the best of the thoughts of people in the small groups come together, and that's a really nice dynamic. Okay, how about follow-up? We've had our first meeting, let's say. We've sent out email invitations, we've called people, we've talked to people, we've texted with people, we've asked our church maybe even to make announcements, to make a broader group of people aware of what we're doing. How about follow-up from the first meeting? What do you find important in what your experience has been with groups?
I think in general, sometimes if you're concerned about how much you're in their face, and you can certainly send them an email.
Yeah.
Emails can be thrown away or they can be read without too much in your face part.
Yeah.
Especially if you're kind of new to the, you don't know, these people this be their first group of any kind, and you want them to know that they're cared about, that they've been noticed, that you appreciate them, but you also don't want them to get scared like you're trying to take over their lives or it's an Amway meeting.
Just following Kathy, yeah, I think when you do a personal follow-up, I think people actually feel valued and noticed when you do that. And I think it's important, too, if this is a relationship, to not only follow up with them so that way they come to the group, but actually invest in the relationship outside of the group as well.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, we're really trying to build Christian community. We're just not having group meetings, study meetings kind of thing. We're trying to develop a relationship. And I do think having people not only get to know me better and Teresa better, but getting to know each other better. And so right off the bat, we want to send them all the contact information. This is our little sign-up sheet we had last Tuesday, so that they have all the contact information, because we're hoping to connect them with each other. And of course, all of us have seen tremendous friendships come out of our groups, and that's a big part of it. It's a big part of discipleship, really, is having people, develop and deepen friendships. That's what I want to see in my group. If you could look at an X-ray of your group and your group's interaction with each other, both at the meeting and then subsequently as the weeks go on and on between meetings, what would that spider web of interconnected relationships look like? I think that'd be a good point.
I think that's a good point, because if communication is not always coming just from you, but from others in the group, I think they'll feel more a part of it. So maybe not just you following up, but your other team members doing something as well. And then, the more relationships they have in the group, the more they'll want to be there. If it's just a relationship just with you, then they may not come back.
We've got a lot, for those who are listening or watching, we've got a lot of firepower here of experience with folks who've been leading small groups. And we're really hopeful that you also likewise gain increasing ability to lead and facilitate small group studies. And if the Chosen fits for you, which I hope it does, and the reason that you're watching this, please use it. And we will continue to have our Zoom meetings. Right now, they're Fridays at 2 o'clock Pacific time. It's 5 o'clock Eastern time. We don't know where this ministry is going. We're collecting people who are interested in supporting it, not financially, but being a part of it in terms of the content side of things, being part of it in terms of recruiting and getting the word out of what's happening, and contacting churches, student groups about how they might be able to incorporate The Chosen and other movies for that matter into a study that's seeker and skeptic friendly. So hang with us. This is ongoing dialogue about the Jesus study and The Chosen study. Thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.